a lot of the hostility that came out of the Biden administration was based on cultural issues.
We have suffered not only on a political level, but we have talked about it a lot, how the Biden administration cancelled the agreement on avoiding double taxation with the U.S.
Currently, Hungary has a huge competitive disadvantage. Before the 1st of January 2024, the tax burden was like 15%. Now it is 35%. It would be great to get rid of this burden.
If the tariffs would be imposed on EU, it would affect our economies in a very bad way.
Trump is, as a matter of fact, going to be using tariffs because it's something that he has at the tip of his pen. And there's a great opportunity for Hungary to be a kind of gateway for American involvement, a new era of American involvement in Europe.
Hello everyone, we have the next edition of Transatlantic Relations Podcast of Oeconomus Economic Foundation. My name is Anton Bendarzsevszkij, I'm the director of Oeconomus, and we have very special guests here, starting with Christopher Butler, executive director of Tholos Foundation and Americans for Tax Reform. Then we have Peter Törcsi, the president of the board of Oeconomus Foundation, and Szabolcs Pásztor, the director of research of Oeconomus. And today we'll talk about U.S Hungarian relations and maybe a bit broader about European and U.S relations. And of course, a special event which preceded these talks is the inauguration of Donald Trump and his second presidency term, which make it possible to talk maybe about the improvement of relations between Hungary and the U.S. because previously it went maybe to its deepest point. So hopefully now we are climbing up. Let's start a bit earlier, before even maybe before Biden or before Trump. What impacted the most the past relations between Hungary and U.S. during the previous administrations? So if we are talking about not just Biden, but maybe Obama and maybe the first Trump presidency, which were the main factors which affected the bilateral relations between our countries? Who would like to start?
Well, I actually think that a lot of the factors were things that were unspoken and were in the subtext. A lot of the hostility that came out of the Biden administration was based on cultural issues to some degree, and a desire to get the United States involved in conflicts that the Hungarian government was having with the wider European Union government. And so I think despite what some of the obvious conflicts that they would claim would be the case, I think that's fundamentally that was the biggest problem with the Biden administration. I mean, what do you guys think?
Yeah, basically the positive aspect of the past, let's say 10 or 15 years were that the economic and trade relations were never been harmed, even with regard on political disagreements and misunderstandings. But yeah, you're right. So unfortunately, I'm sure that you have much more experience, domestic experience, how the Biden administration operated from a cultural perspective in the U.S. But sure, the whole neo-Marxist, woke, progressive ideology peaked under the Biden administration, what we have experienced here in Europe as well, especially in Hungary, because Hungary has, the Hungarian government and Hungarian prime minister have always been a strong ally and friend of President Trump. He was the first European leader who supported him and endorsed him in 2016, and after that constantly. And of course, it's a special relation between the two politicians. And this sort of alignment by Viktor Orbán, Hungarian Prime Minister, increased the hostility, or how should I put it, by the Biden administration. And we have suffered not only on a political level, but we have talked about it a lot, how the Biden administration cancelled the agreement on avoiding double taxation with the U.S., how the Biden administration withdrew or restricted the ESTA eligibility of Hungarian citizens. And there are a lot of other political steps which were unfriendly during this 4 or 5 years. But we have to mention that even though this sort of hostile steps against each other, the FDIs poured into the country from the United States on the defense level as being part of the NATO. The defense cooperation were really good and remained really good. And now, we basically, end of last year, before November, I think, in terms of relations between the two countries, we reached the bottom. And now we should get uphill.
If you don't mind,
maybe you could
yes,
also emphasize more about the role of because Peter mentioned the U.S. Companies that, well, ideology aside, but basically business relations, economic relations will see functioning. So, what roles are those U.S. companies are playing in Hungary? Which companies we are talking about, the biggest players? Maybe you could tell more about that.
Yeah, if you don't chase me away, I mentioned a number, and that is $9 billion American dollars. This is the amount of money invested by the American companies in Hungary. And we were open, we Hungarians were open when it came to opening our borders to American companies. And the American companies are fine here. They have their operations, manufacturing, but not only manufacturing, research also. And we have 650 American companies here in Hungary. They are employing more than 90,000 people. When I multiply it by 3 or 4, it means that basically, directly or indirectly, a lot of people are involved with or involved in the American business activities. And well, during the recent years, the U.S. became the 5th one when it came to investments on a yearly basis. It would be great to have the Americans back to the top 3. And when
are we talking about mainly like software companies, like Microsoft, IBM, or it's more about manufacturing?
Yes, basically everyone has the idea that only manufacturing companies are investing here in Hungary, but well, that is a one-sided argumentation, and that is a one-sided picture they show. Yes, we have some manufacturing companies here in Hungary, but the Americans are heavily engaged in research and development, and they maintain research centers as well. So they are there in the service sector also, and they are building on the sharp-minded Hungarians. They are building on the intelligence of the Hungarian engineers, for example. And we are so lucky because we have Forbes 500 listed companies as well. And when it comes to the bilateral relations between the U.S. and Hungary, we can say that the economic aspect of that or the business aspect of that has been always fruitful, promising, and politics were bad, but basically the business side of the relations were always good. And just one more important comment here. Hungary trades quite a lot with the U.S., and Hungary maintains a positive trade balance with the United States. And during the recent years also, the numbers were going up, so we were trading more with the U.S., and the total value of exports increased quite visibly.
So feel free to just jump in and comment, or we can go on with the next.
I was just going to mention something that people might be really aware of already, but that I think everybody knows that Joe Biden was not completely all there for much of his presidency. And even the Democrats now that were in his administration
it was visible.
Yeah, it was very visible.
Especially in the last 2 years.
Yeah, especially the last 2 years. The cognitive decline was really pronounced.
Anyway, I felt sorry for the guy, so it really was embarrassing.
Yeah, it was
I'm
very
sorry for
embarrassing,
him.
and very embarrassing for the whole United States, frankly. But what that meant is that he wasn't really in charge of a lot of what he was doing. So he had such a pronounced left-wing government.
But who ran, in that case, the government?
Well, that's a good question. But what happened is that it's like if the king dies and there's no new king for a while, the individual barons and local lords, they're the only people that are in charge. And that is what was going on in the Biden administration for large part. So whoever it was that cared the most about the given issue area, or whoever it was that represented the Democrat interest group or left-wing interest group that was most focused on the area, that's who was running it. And so if you look at foreign policy, it was kind of this generic State Department, global deep state type folks that were running that. If you look at like social policy, it was the far left woke part of the of the country that was running the DEI zone. If you look at economic policy, it was the most far left people in the economic zone, and it was really just that was the group of barons or lords that was standing around that was taking over all this stuff. And it's why that the Biden administration was not just peak of the woke phenomenon, but it was also peak of the deep state phenomenon, because you had this huge bureaucracy, and both the formal bureaucracy within the government, but also the informal. I like the term that the British use, which is the blob, because it's even more than because a lot of it is not state-based. A lot of it is these NGOs, and I guess we'll get into talking about that a little bit more when we talk about Trump and what he's done. But that's why all of this this establishment kind of layer that was layered over the United States, especially, but all of the United States foreign policy footprint, it really peaked during that time, and it's really going to be a lot to unwind. But the relationship between the U.S. and Hungary was part of that effect. And in addition to the business relationships never going away, there was also the individual friendships. I mean, I think the general friendship between the Hungarian people and the United States never waned at all. In fact, probably became stronger when you had a number of American conservative personalities that are like, hey, what's going on here? I'm really interested in what these folks are doing and what makes all the right people so irritated with them, right?
So before going into all these layers of different aspects of political and economic cooperation, let's talk about the double taxation treaty, because Peter also mentioned it. And we are just coming from an event organized by Oeconomus and Tholos Foundation and the ATR. The first event of this kind in Hungary, Oeconomus Economic Club. And among the speakers, at least 5 speakers were also raising the issue about double taxation. So this is really an issue which hurts bilateral relations. So how did it really affect the relations? Because it was it came into power beginning of last year. So
Yes.
it's
1st of
already
January.
1st of January 2024. So it's already 1 year since we don't have this treaty. So how did it really affect the companies operating in U.S. And in Hungary, and what can be done? I mean, Trump came to power, so maybe...
Do not forget the fun fact that Russia and Belarus are still having this sort of agreement with the United States. So it was really a politically motivated cancellation of an international agreement by the Biden administration. So I'm not an expert on it and I don't know the numbers, but from a very objective perspective, if an American company decides to invest into Europe, of course you are not going to on the list among the first picks when you are not having an agreement on the avoidance of double taxation. So from this perspective, we are already behind of our partners in the region. And taking into consideration that we have a very business-friendly regulatory and taxation environment, we should be on the top of the list when it comes to FDI coming from the U.S. to Europe. So it harms our potential to doing business with the U.S. And of course, we experienced as an NGO, as a foundation, that if we want to hire a research fellow from the U.S., it gives us at first a huge bureaucratic burden to find out how to solve the taxation problem. So these are the macro and the micro problems we have already experienced. That is why it is a really important first step to re-enter into this agreement to keep us among the first choices for a possible American investors when it comes to Europe.
Yes, currently Hungary has a huge competitive disadvantage. We mostly talk about competitive advantage, but well, we can talk about the opposite as well. Investors from the US will not choose us because for them we are like a burden. And again, I'll tell you two numbers or two percentages. Before the 1st of January 2024, the tax burden was like 15%. Now is it 35%. And we may say that it is not affecting families, but when families, for example, in Hungary buy American shares, they have to pay this extra tax burden. The same is true for American or Hungarian companies operating in the US. They are supposed to pay more. So even if the bilateral relations in case of business were good, this is already harming the bilateral relations, and this is like a burden for us. It would be great to get rid of this burden.
Yeah, and actually you don't have to think about some companies which are really, let's say, far from you and affecting only some, I don't know, companies or some people. You can speak, for example, about YouTube. I was just talking to one of my friends at a Hungarian media outlet, talking about their revenues coming from the videos uploaded to YouTube, and they have to pay over 30% of tax because because we don't have the treaty. And before it was much less, so they could operate on a bigger revenue, and now they have problems, for example, also because of the treaty, or because we don't have the treaty. So,
and it's not like this is some kind of special secret arrangement that we used to have or anything. This is very basic kind of international stuff that you have to do to function on a bilateral basis or doing anything worldwide. I mean, this is, like you said, Russia, Belarus, practically everybody on Earth. We have this relationship with, because your revenue service cannot figure out how to deal with the problems unless you have this relationship with the other country's revenue service. I mean, these are really basic things. I hope people appreciate how incredibly unthinkable it was for the Biden administration to take this unbelievable step. I mean, it's almost like the death penalty. It's just nuts for them to do this. You know?
We have this saying that imagine if your allies treat you like that, then how would they treat their enemies? But in this case, we are actually the ally of the United States. We are part of the NATO. We are an important partner, and still.
Let me get to a more broader view of that, because basically we understood that this sort of moves conducted by the Biden administration were grounded into a political ideology, which was the main driving force of U.S. foreign policy in the past 4 years. And we see a jumpstart by the Trump administration currently. And my question is, because we're a bit afraid that this sort of ideology-driven foreign policy will move its seat from D.C. to Brussels. But what do you think about that? Is it really defeated by the incoming administration and by Trump? I mean, this kind of neo-Marxist progressive ideology-driven foreign policy, which already had effects on economies, or it's just a battle what Trump has won, the war is still out there, and we should join forces to defeat and combat this sort of very ideology-driven foreign policy and trade policies?
Yeah, I mean, the war is certainly not won yet. We've only just started in terms of what we can do in the United States. We have defunded a couple of their most important entities so far. including especially USAID. And while they did do some good stuff, it was mostly an instrumentality of the left.
We enjoy watching it. To be honest, we enjoy watching
I
it.
mean, it has. And I've had friends that have worked in this zone for a number of years, and they've been telling me about all of these activities that we're funding completely in a completely counterproductive way, in a way that tears down Western civilization, frankly. And in every country where it's operating, even where it's to the detriment of U.S. foreign policy, it's like we have our official foreign policy apparatus that's run through the president and the Secretary of State, and then you have, on the other hand, you're writing checks to all these entities that are causing problems like extremist terrorism and all of this by actually funding cultural degradation in a lot of these places. And so you're funding like both sides of the same thing on the same issue. Really destructive behavior. But it also helped to create this world where we have that you talked about that is kind of now shifting to Brussels. But over time, as the Trump administration gets more established, I hope that he can work with folks like the Hungarian government to help put pressure on a number of those other entities that are still existing around the world. I mean, Trump hasn't really, and Marco Rubio, who's the Secretary of State now, really have just started in this zone in terms of cleaning up what's going on at the State Department. There's a huge lot of this stuff that goes on at State Department too, just not at USAID and the National Endowment for Democracy. There's so many of these other alphabet entities that are still floating around. And we also have to get through the legal challenges in the United States now, which folks are seeing multiply. There's the deep state is fighting hard to protect what they've got, and anytime they think that they can find a tiny little jurisdiction somewhere in the U.S. to issue an injunction to stop the defunding of some of this, they'll try to do it. And I think that's going to be an ongoing legal battle that's going to take time, and it doesn't in the U.S. and it doesn't just play into the foreign policy, but also to a lot of our domestic policy and the efforts that we're making there to get waste and fraud and abuse cut off.
I just try to imagine someone learning international economics. In those textbooks, they talk about open trade, low taxes, and things like that. And there is nothing wrong when someone champions free trade, lower taxes. But it is quite confusing when at the same time they increase taxes for certain countries for political reasons. Someone can be extremely confused, and someone can conclude that, well, politics can override economics and business relations also.
Let's talk maybe about the relations, broader relations between Europe and the United States. We've seen discussion or diplomatic discussion between U.S. and Canada, U.S. and Mexico about the tariffs, the custom tariffs, and basically then they came to agreement. The EU is afraid that we will have a similar discussion with U.S. about about the tariff imposed by Trump on the European Union. So what do you think will happen in this regard? Could we be affected? Because honestly speaking, if the tariffs would be imposed on EU, it would affect our economies in a very bad way because right now Europe is in a very bad economic shape after COVID, after energy crisis, after the war in Ukraine, and now if the tariffs would raise between our main economic partner, US is the biggest partner of the European Union, and vice versa for US, Europe is the biggest economic partner. So it would completely destroy our economy. So what do you think? Will we see the question of tariffs as just as a diplomatic pressure, or would Trump really go on with these policies?
Well, it's definitely coming. I think that like you said, we've seen it repeat over and over again. Stephen Miller, A key part of the Trump administration was on Fox Business just the other day talking about the problem of European tariffs on American automobiles. And he conflated some of that to the VAT, said that there's a big the VAT in Europe, and indicated that there's a big administration initiative coming soon to help to rectify this situation. My hope is always that we are trying to get to this environment where we have freer trade, a level playing field, and there are a lot of people in the administration that have that goal, and I think Trump himself is among them. There's another school of thought among some people in the administration that tariffs are their own intrinsic good, that we should deliberately be trying to erect protectionist trade barriers around the United States in order to make sure that everything is manufactured in the United States and that we have a greater degree of sovereignty and independence and all that. I mean, we're not from that school. We believe that free trade is very important for American prosperity, and that Americans get richer when we trade more. That's like the foundation of the United States, and we'd like to see more of that. But we do recognize that there are some of these imbalances, and that Trump is, as a matter of fact, going to be using tariffs because it's something that he has at the tip of his pen. Unlike a lot of remedies that we might prefer that require congressional action or something that's more complex, a tariff is something he can simply do. So I think that it is pretty likely that this has continued to be an instrument that the administration uses, especially with regards to Europe. I mean, in a way, it's unfortunate because this kind of uncertainty that this strategy with tariffs creates is not good for anybody's economic growth in business.
Yes, that's true.
They require stability, predictability, and certainty. And when you have this, even if the end result is good, when you have this environment that erodes that because there's the threat of tariff hanging over your head. So I'm hoping that after this initial period, we get to a time where there's a steady state, things are expected, and we can get down to making money. Everybody can get down to making money all around the world and creating prosperity and a culture of abundance. But that will take a little bit of time to shake out. I worry a little bit about what might get written into law, whether it's protectionist measures that are more directly written into law through the tax writing process or something else. I hope we can avoid that, because one thing that we have seen out of Trump is that he has been willing to bring those tariffs down once we get to a better negotiating footing. And Biden never did, by the way. I mean, Biden never reduced any of those Trump tariffs. Trump reduced Trump tariffs last time he was president, but Biden never did. So I get a little bit tired of hearing anybody that claims to be free trade that was happy under Biden, but now they're wringing their hands under Trump, when Trump ostensibly is going in the right direction on free trade. Now, we may find the road bumpy and his instrumentality less than desirable, but the fact is that's where he's aiming to go. And Biden never was there. He was about protecting domestic labor markets. Everything that he did was revolving around massive American trade union bosses. So at least we're not there. And I think it's going to be okay when it's going to create advantages for folks like Hungary that have particular ideological alignment with the Trump administration in a way that other places are not going to enjoy.
That's my point, because as we see, Trump has this very sort of transactional approach when it comes to foreign policy and international relations. And as you said, that some kind of tariffs are coming to the European Union, of course, basically as a negotiation basis or ground. But what do you think, since the two leaders, I mean, Hungarian Prime Minister and Trump, has this very special relationship, and it's a long-lasting friendship. Could it be that Hungary could enjoy some special status or exception from these tariffs, which we don't know yet, the measure and in the size or whatever. But anyway, because of this transactional approach, can we maybe enjoy a different status compared to those major European countries who have been hostile or unfriendly with Trump at his first term or at the past years when he emerged and became president again?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's good reason to hope for that. We saw last time when Trump was president, he would target specific countries based on the goods that they might produce, where he saw that there was a particular kind of problem. So I think that's likely to be the case, where he would look at, well, we're going to exempt this particular thing that is a focus of Hungary at this time. Or I think there's, especially if he sees the prime minister and the government as being helpful, trying to get things in a better direction on a given issue, right, with regards to the European Union. So I am optimistic about that. And there's a great opportunity for Hungary to be a kind of gateway for American or for American involvement, a new era of American involvement in Europe. That's kind of exciting too.
If we are talking about Trump's transactional approach, and if he wants to make a deal, but of course from European side we also want a good deal, because, well, it's our national interest from the perspective of Hungary and the European Union. So what could be the win-win deal which could be reached between the EU and the Trump administration? What is the point on which they could agree? What do you think? What are the benefits which Trump wants to get, and what are the benefits which Europe would like to keep?
Well, if you ask me, I would say that it is true that Europe enjoys a trade surplus when trading with the US. But when we take a closer look, it turns out that this surplus is there only in case of trading with goods. But when it comes to trading with services, the Americans are way better. Business services, for example. And in this light, I would say that the Europeans are much interested in maintaining this trade surplus in case of goods, and the Americans are interested in maintaining this surplus in case of the trade services or business services. So I think these are two pillars on which the negotiations will be built. And, well, we Europeans are bad, I say, and I use the word bad, when it comes to providing business services and services in general.
Startups, high-tech,
yes.
Innovation,
That's
we
true.
are way behind, unfortunately.
Yes, because it's over-regulated, our market. From this
yes,
sense.
very much regulated. In the morning I said, and if you don't mind I repeat, that Americans are good at doing research, Asians are good at manufacturing, and Europeans are good at regulating things.
Let's talk again about Hungary. So we do hope that after the last 4 years, and the fact that not too many U.S. investments arrived to Hungary, so we do hope that now we'll see like a huge wave of investment. So maybe a question a bit provocative. What do you think? We will see a Tesla mega factory in Hungary, or anything like a huge? It shouldn't be a Tesla or anything, but a huge U.S. project which could come to Hungary and maybe use Hungary as a regional hub, because basically geographically we are in the heart of Europe, right? So maybe because of good personal relations between Trump and Orban, maybe we could see a similar big project coming to Hungary. What do you think?
If I may, I say that the Hungarian Investment Promotion Agency is working very hard with would-be American partners. And I'm pretty much sure that they have something on the table to announce. And I can confirm the fact that the Hungarian business culture is still good, attractive for the American companies. And based on the experience of some other American companies, they are going to be much interested in investing in the country. So I'm optimistic about this. And I'm pretty much sure that in 2025, we will hear a big announcement.
Yes, and it must be taken into consideration that in this region, Hungary is the most capitalist country. So we don't have a very strong union movement. The Hungarians are open for business. They don't have this statist mindset compared to basically all of our neighbors, where this labor movement have always been more stronger. That is by having a capitalist free market government in the past 15 years, it's shaped the business culture of the country as well. Of course, we have low taxes, business-friendly environment, attractive to FDIs and so on. So getting rid of the obstacles, what we have already mentioned, agreements with the U.S. and that sort of stuff, re-entering into the ESTA program with a full membership. These are the most important tasks to be done as first steps, because when we are getting rid of the obstacles, we are the most business-friendly nation in the region. So we should be the most attractive pick for U.S. investors.
Yeah, I agree about that completely. I think that the obstacles that exist tend to be European, at the European level, and we can talk about that too. But when you look around the region and all of the EU, Hungary really stands out as a great place for the U.S. to move in and do business. What we need to focus on, I think, the challenges are European ones.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, Hungary, in manufacturing, we have all German brands here present in Hungary: Volkswagen Group, Audi, BMW, Mercedes. We have some Japanese manufacturers. Suzuki is present in Hungary. We don't have any American manufacturing companies yet. So maybe, Tesla was an example, but then there could be other examples coming to Hungary, right? Mm. So
we would be glad to have American car manufacturing plants in here, but again, Szabolcs, you are much more aware of that, but again, regulation. So the U.S. car manufacturing, standards are not meeting the requirements of the European Union regulatory framework, and that's the main obstacle. And it could be a much bigger deal between the European Union and the U.S. how to deregulate the European standards and regulatory framework in order to have U.S. car manufacturing plants here in Europe, and it's again ideology-driven green policies over regulation which have harmed, and it was not even in intention of a protectionist European economic policies. The deep green nonsense created this sort of regulatory framework which prevents U.S. car manufacturing plants to set foot in Europe.
Yeah, when you have a regime that's driven out of the European Green New Deal and all of this, where you have, it's creating this unnatural split between what's going on in the United States with development and what they're trying to generate in Europe through net zero policies, completely phasing out internal combustion engines, getting rid of nuclear power in the case of Germany, where you have technologies that are being developed in the United States based on the free market, and they don't have they're not going to have a market anymore in Europe. And on the other hand, technologies being developed in Europe that are not really focused on consumers, but are focused on meeting a set of relatively arbitrary tests that are created by a regulatory entity, and they're not going to find any buyers outside of Europe. So we really need to get back on the right track. Hungary is such an important part for that. We really need to get back on the right track so that Europe is going to get back to the business of doing economic growth again, and the United States is going to be in a position where we can invest more in places like Hungary, and where we can have a better trade relationship on that front. If you just look at AI, for example, European AI regulation, which has already suppressed the rollout of a new Apple phone. If you look at the Digital Markets Act and Digital Services Act, which are causing so much problem in the free speech area for American tech companies, with this German lawsuit against Elon Musk that's proceeding, or whether you look at Pillar 1 or Pillar 2, the global minimum tax regime that attempts to tax worldwide American companies on worldwide income basis. These are all problems that we have to figure out how to sort through. And the thing about it is that, I mean, it's the good news is that if America exercises some muscle in order to get Europe to make some of these changes, it's actually really good for everybody in Europe too. I mean, I'm sure it's all everybody at this table would love. So it's like when we were trying to do during the first Trump administration, we were trying to do a U.S. UK free trade agreement. Like everything that they wanted to force on us was all stuff that I wanted, right? It would have been awesome, like deregulating the banking sector being the biggest one. So we have a horrible banking regulatory regime in the U.S. Hopefully we're working on that during this administration too. But we were never going to get a lot of these people to agree to that unless we had somebody trying to talk us into it. It's like, okay, if you make me, I'll get more free market or I'll restore free speech or whatever it is. So there's a lot of cause for optimism, I think. It's going to be, it's great to have this relationship between, especially between the Prime Minister and Trump, but this growing relationship is kind of exciting. And I think things are going to be going in a better direction. I mean, even just the competition alone, right, is going to it creates such a great incentive for Europe to start. And there's already this building momentum there, but to get this more right-sized regulatory environment.
Let's cover the last topic, which I was thinking of, like foreign political aspect, because we were talking about Europe, Hungary. We haven't talked about Russia and China before, but for that reason, Hungary was criticized before by Joe Biden, for example, or even during the first Trump administration. So what do you think would change, or would it change at all during the second Trump administration? How Trump sees our pragmatic relations between Russia and Hungary, China and Hungary, and of course it also stands for the relations of China and European Union, maybe Russia and European Union. So
especially for Germany, they have the strongest and best relations either with Russia and China, of course. Basically on economic and trade relations, these are not by any sort of political relations, but we have as Europe a different position in that sense.
So what do you think will happen in the next 4 years in this regard? Just to turn it into a pragmatic way. So will, let's say, Donald Trump force Europe and Hungary to cut our trade relations with China, for example, or will Trump force Europe to buy, let's say, U.S. energy resources instead of Russian gas, for example?
I can't say for sure what will happen, but I can maybe it won't be more fun to say what I think should happen. One of the keys that for both the U.S. and the EU in dealing with Russia and China is to work more closely with each other. So we make this argument a lot of times in the U.S., but when we withdraw from an area, China, especially China, is the one that rolls in there. And if we cut these ties, and we see this in Southeast Asia and East Asia, if we cut these ties and don't enter into better trading relationships with our ideological allies, we create a vacuum that then China steps in to fill, whether it's through investment or whether it's through direct investment, whether it's through business investment or the Silk Road Initiative or whatever it is that they're working on. They have the ability to step in and do that. And the EU has this problem too, and we really can't afford. at least until we get through the next 50 years when China has its demographic collapse. And I think that we're really in this zone where we have to really be focused on China for a while, and we have to, if we want to argue about something else later, fine, but we have to, for these next few decades especially, we need to be more focused on dealing with the threat from China, and that requires these more intense alliances and trading relationships. So I think we would make the argument that rather than forcing, well, you don't want to force anybody to do anything, but the world environment makes it such that we can't afford not to build and intensify this relationship between Hungary and the U.S., between the EU and the U.S.
I am an economist by profession, and Trump is a businessman. And I think it is not bad when we talk about win-win situations when understanding him. And let me tell you an example. Apple iPhones are designed in the US and they are manufactured in Asia, in China. So he may say that let them manufacture the iPhones because we have more value added in the US. So we are going to retain the value added, and they can retain the manufacturing. And I think this will continue, and it may give a competitive advantage for the Americans and for the Chinese at the same time. So if you ask me, I would say that win-win situations will be honored, win-win situations will be maintained in the coming years.
I couldn't agree more. What basically we need, already one thing happened. There is a strong leader in the West again with Trump. And there was a lack of leadership under Biden, and we still don't have leadership here in Europe. So as Europeans, we cannot stand up for ourselves when it comes to, even business or political negotiation with our adversaries or partner or whatever you say. But having Trump back, it fuels the European strength as well, because our big body is again back in the Oval Office. And the other thing, what you have said, it's very important. As Hungarians and as Europeans, we don't want to suffer again from a new type of Cold War or whatever is happening, but we need good deals, and we need strong leadership in the West, which makes the adversaries of the West, afraid again of the West. We need a Western dominance in the world again, and we need to keep our trade missions and trade relationships open. Even with our adversaries, where it's necessary to keep those trade relationships. But without leadership, we cannot maintain these deals. And I think, as we understood how Trump is operating, that since he's a businessman, as you mentioned, he wants to close a deal with the friends and with the adversaries as well. And we hope for that.
Sounds like a good plan. So let's finish on this note. Thank you very much, Christopher Butler, Peter Törcsi, and Szabolcs Pastor, and myself. I'm Anton Bendarzsevszkij. So if you liked this podcast, I do hope you liked it. Then please follow us on our social media, on YouTube. Follow our website. We have a lot of interesting articles and analysis, and we'll come with other podcasts as well. Thank you.